In the suffocating darkness of the Vietnamese jungle, where gunfire ripped through the air and the flames cast harsh reflections across a scarred face, Sergeant Bob Barnes stood still, eyes wide open, yet utterly lifeless. It was the moment that sent shivers down the spines of millions who watched Platoon. But few ever knew that. The man behind that haunting gaze, Tom Berenger, carried wounds Hollywood never dared to speak of. The bigger question is this: why did an actor once regarded as the steel warrior of the 1980s almost disappear from Hollywood's blinding spotlight? Was it a choice he made himself? A sudden misstep? Or a silent battle only he could truly understand? Tom Berenger once climbed to the pinnacle of fame with the force of an undeniable star. Oscar-nominated, Golden Globe-winning, and an icon of the war film genre. But after that, he slowly faded away. As if the soldier who once stood amid flying bullets could not win against something far more dangerous: his own life. Today, we're not just retelling Tom Berenger's career. We're unraveling him, from the boy who grew up in the industrial outskirts of Chicago, to the man haunted by the very roles he played, and finally, to the long silence that Hollywood never cared to explain. Because behind every star, there is always a question the public never thinks to ask. When a role becomes too big, is there still room left for the real person inside? Tom Berenger was born on May 31st, 1949, in Chicago, an industrial city where the smell of ink and the clatter of metal machines seemed to never fade. Back then, he carried the name Thomas Michael Moore, a name so ordinary that no one could have imagined the boy behind it would one day become one of the most haunting faces in the war film genre. His father was a printer for the Chicago Sun-Times. He would often come home late at night, his hands still stained with ink, his shirt heavy with the scent of machine oil, and his eyes bearing the exhaustion of a man carrying an entire family on his shoulders. That image, a quiet, strong but perpetually tired father, etched deeply into Tom's mind the feeling that adulthood was its own silent battlefield. His mother was the complete opposite. She was the gentle presence that kept a last trace of softness inside their small suburban home. When his father was away for work, she was the one who taught Tom patience, understanding, and the hidden sorrows adults rarely admitted. From her, Tom learned how to listen and observe, skills that would later become the foundation of every role he ever played. Tom's childhood had no loud tragedies, but it was filled with the small scratches a child doesn't yet know how to name. The feeling of a father always too busy to talk. The feeling of having to grow up earlier than his peers. The feeling that the world outside was harsher than he hoped it would be. These fragments shaped his contemplative, resilient nature, one that always carried a shadow of darkness in his eyes. At school, Tom wasn't an outstanding student, nor was he someone who drew attention. But he possessed a rare gift, a deep, piercing observation of people. He remembered the weary faces of workers after their shifts, the resigned gaze of men who had lost their dreams. These images later became the raw material for the raw, gritty, authentic characters he would portray with uncanny intensity. By the end of high school, Tom began to realize he wasn't meant for the safe, predictable path his family hoped he would follow. Something inside him stirred, a vague calling, a desire to live many lives instead of just one. He didn't yet know that this calling was acting, but he knew one thing: he was not born to stand still. And so, from a boy raised among the clattering sounds of industrial printing presses, Tom Berenger began a journey to find himself, a journey that would lead him to the stage, then to Hollywood, and ultimately transform him into one of the most psychologically complex figures in modern war cinema. As he entered young adulthood, Tom Berenger carried within him a strange restlessness, a feeling many might call anxiety, but to Tom, it felt more like the whisper of a path yet to be discovered. He studied journalism at the University of Missouri, a choice that was stable, sensible, and proper in the eyes of most working-class families. But the more he studied, the more he realized he was trying to force a puzzle piece into a box where it didn't belong. On late nights in the dormitory, while his friends discussed futures as reporters or editors, Tom found himself wondering, was I born to retell other people's stories, or to live inside those stories myself? One day, when he casually followed a friend to an audition for a school play, something shifted inside him. The moment he stepped onto the stage for the first time, the lights warming his face, the entire room falling silent, Tom realized a truth he had never dared to admit. This was where he belonged. The feeling hit him so powerfully that it frightened him. He feared it because he knew it meant taking a completely different path. Feared it because it meant abandoning the safe future his family hoped he would choose. But sometimes, one small moment is enough to pivot an entire life. After graduation, Tom didn't choose the newsroom. He chose New York, a place where artistic dreams are both intoxicating and unforgiving. To survive, he worked countless odd jobs, waiting tables, tending bars, and even becoming a flight attendant for Eastern Airlines in Puerto Rico. A young man flying across unfamiliar horizons with only one thought consuming him. I have to act. I have to be on a stage. But New York is not a place for the easily discouraged. Tom was rejected at audition after audition, so many that a weaker person might have packed up and gone home. And when he tried to join the union under his real name, Tom Moore, he discovered another actor already had it. To keep going, he had no choice but to change his name. And thus, Tom Berenger was born. Ironically, sometimes to become yourself, you have to begin by changing your name. His first roles came slowly, paid little, and were often small parts in television shows hardly anyone remembered. But those difficult years sharpened his inner world, helping him understand that what he sought wasn't merely an opportunity, but a role big enough to speak the truths he had carried inside for so long. The turning point arrived when he appeared in The Big Chill, 1983. Though his role wasn't large, Tom left a lasting impression, and for the first time, Hollywood took notice of him. From a young man who left Chicago with an old suitcase and a handful of dreams, Tom Berenger began moving into an orbit that would eventually lead him to one of the most iconic war film performances in cinematic history. When Tom Berenger stepped into the mid-1980s, it felt as though Hollywood had been waiting for a new face. A man with a rugged exterior, eyes filled with unspoken truths, and a silence that suggested more than 100 lines of dialogue could. He wasn't the polished, glamorous type of his era. He possessed a different kind of magnetism, a raw, unfiltered authenticity. And then Platoon arrived. When director Oliver Stone, a Vietnam War veteran, searched for actors to embody soldiers crushed by the jungle, he needed someone who could carry both the darkness and the contradictions that war carves into a human being. Not a clean-cut hero, but a soul bent and twisted by combat. Tom Berenger stepped forward, and Hollywood never forgot that gaze. As Sergeant Bob Barnes, Tom didn't just act. He lived the character. The weathered face, the piercing eyes, the cruelty laced with invisible anguish, everything blended so seamlessly that the audience could no longer distinguish where the role ended and the man began. Bob Barnes wasn't a villain. He was the embodiment of exhaustion, confusion, brutality, and survival. Everything war creates. The role brought Tom an Oscar nomination, a Golden Globe win, and a meteoric fame that few actors experience in their entire careers. But more importantly, Platoon became a cultural phenomenon. Veterans saw themselves in the shadow of Bob Barnes. Younger audiences witnessed a version of war far from Hollywood's usual gloss. And Tom Berenger became a defining face of the modern anti-war film movement. He didn't stop at war films. Tom continued to reveal an astonishing range. From the washed-up baseball player in Major League to cops, villains, and even the occasional comedic role. His brilliance didn't come from conventional beauty, but from his ability to transform, from an inner force that gave every character depth. Yet behind a rising star was a pressure the audience never saw. Expectations from Hollywood, from the media, and from within himself. Once he reached the summit, every step afterward was scrutinized. Every role had to be as good as or better than Platoon. It was a shadow so large that even some once brilliant stars were swallowed whole by it. For Tom Berenger, glory didn't arrive like a miracle. It was built from pain, discipline, and the persistence forged during years of hardship. But the same light that lifted him high would, in later years, become a weight he'd have to carry. As the cracks in his golden era slowly began to show. Glory can make a person shine before the public, but it can also expose the cracks they no longer have time to hide. For Tom Berenger, the explosion of Platoon and a series of intense roles led audiences to assume he was made of steel. Hard, cold, unbreakable. But the truth was that those very roles were beginning to erode him from the inside. Berenger once said that, when playing Bob Barnes, he had to dig into the psyche of a man so twisted by war that he could no longer distinguish between good and evil, right and wrong. It made him carry nightmares about the war, about the brutal decisions his character was forced to make. Few could imagine that even after leaving the set, he would jolt awake in the middle of the night, gasping for breath, as if he had just returned from the jungles of Vietnam. But psychological hauntings were only one part of the storm. Fame that arrives too fast invites relentless scrutiny from the media. Articles, harsh comments, and heavy criticism targeting his post-Platoon roles slowly made Tom feel like he was trapped inside a cage of his own making. A great success becomes a colossal shadow that weighs down every choice that follows. He knew that one misstep, a single failed movie, would be enough for people to say he was not what he used to be. And that's exactly what happened. Several of his later films were poorly received by critics. Some roles were dismissed as lacking depth or repeating the same old image. These words didn't just harm his career, they carved into him a growing sense of fear. The fear of being replaced. A fear every Hollywood actor must eventually confront. Tom's personal life was no more peaceful. He married multiple times, and each marriage carried its own wounds. The pressures of the job, the relentless filming schedules, and his introspective private nature created distance between Tom and the people he loved. He wasn't a bad man. He was simply someone who lived too deeply inside his own inner world. So deeply that he sometimes forgot others couldn't enter it. At certain points, rumors about his involvement with controversial groups, about personal conflicts, or about his temper on set further complicated Tom's image in Hollywood's eyes. And as in every cutthroat industry, anyone perceived as difficult to manage is quietly pushed aside. In the midst of all these upheavals, Tom faced a loneliness he never imagined he would experience. The man who once stood in the jungles of Vietnam on screen, who once made audiences shiver with a single glare, now had to fight a silent war within himself. A war with no script, no director, and no promise of a triumphant ending. This was the storm the public never saw. A quiet, smoldering storm with no loud explosions, yet powerful enough to push a once brilliant star slowly back into the shadows. The downfall of a star never happens in a single night. It comes slowly, quietly, like tiny cracks spreading across glass. Invisible at first, until the moment everything suddenly shatters. For Tom Berenger, it all began with a shadow far too large. Platoon. A legendary role is often like the peak of a mountain. Magnificent, but cold. Once you stand on it, every step that follows is inevitably lower. Audiences expect more, Hollywood watches closely, and the media waits for the perfect moment to ask, "Is that all you've got?" Berenger never lacked talent, but he lacked something Hollywood always demands: compatibility with the era. When the 1990s arrived, tastes shifted. Studios sought younger faces, more versatile, more energetic. And Berenger, with his quiet, rugged, slightly shadowed presence, slowly became the type of actor Hollywood no longer knew what to do with. Spotlights never go out instantly. They simply dim. Lead roles decreased. Big opportunities vanished. His name appeared more often in mid-tier projects, then on television, then in the kinds of films audiences only encounter by chance on dusty video store shelves. But the changes in Hollywood alone weren't enough to pull an actor downhill. The rest came from within him. Tom Berenger was an introspective, private, sometimes stubborn actor who never mastered Hollywood politics. He wasn't the party type, didn't play PR games, and didn't know how to flatter the people who controlled his future. He was the kind of actor who came to work, then left. In an industry where connections can matter more than talent, that solitude became an unintended disadvantage. Then came the private wounds, failed marriages, small conflicts that accumulated over time, and disappointments when projects weren't received well. When a person is forced to face constant turbulence, they tend to withdraw. And Tom did exactly that. He began taking fewer roles, choosing so carefully that he often missed opportunities. The more he tried to avoid failure, the further he drifted from the spotlight. The press didn't make it easier. A few harsh reviews, rumors about a difficult temperament, whispers about him being out of sync with Hollywood's lifestyle, all of it added a fog around his image. Not a major scandal, but a subtle sense of being hard to work with. In the entertainment industry, sometimes that single phrase is enough to halt an entire career. And so, little by little, Tom Berenger disappeared. There was no dramatic fall, no explosive scandal. Just a man who once stood at the center of the spotlight, now quietly stepping away, as if trying not to make a sound. And the big question remains, did he fall because Hollywood changed, or because he no longer wanted to run? But whatever the answer may be, one truth cannot be denied. Tom Berenger's golden era closed not with an explosion, but with a silence so long that many people assumed he had vanished entirely. As Hollywood's lights slowly dimmed, Tom Berenger was forced to face what every former star fears most: silence. No more applause, no more tense press junkets, no more exhausting shoot days. Only a man standing in the emptiness, compelled to listen to the truest voice inside himself. The voice that for years had been buried beneath fame, pressure, and roles too heavy to escape. The consequences of such a turbulent era did not arrive in a single devastating blow, but through countless small scratches accumulated over the years. Falling from the position of a star pushed Tom into what many actors call the long night of a career, the years when they no longer know whether anyone still needs them. He continued acting, but mostly in supporting roles, in projects few people remembered. The shift from Hollywood leading man to a working actor just trying to stay in the craft was a painful collision with his own ego. Yet the most devastating part wasn't the lack of roles. It was the feeling of no longer being seen. Tom had once grown accustomed to audiences discussing him, journalists praising him, directors seeking him out. Now, all those gazes shifted toward a younger, louder, more fashionable generation. He began to understand that glory is not something anyone can hold forever. And sometimes, letting go is the only way not to be burned by it. His personal life didn't escape the fractures either. Several marriages collapsed. Many relationships faded before he even understood why they couldn't last. Tom was never a reckless man. He was the type who carried an entire inner world with him, one so heavy and private that it often left others feeling shut out. Yet he never intended to hurt anyone. He was simply someone who had grown too familiar with loneliness, to the point where solitude became the safest place to hide. There were years when Tom Berenger seemed to live between two worlds. One world was his golden past, where he once stood in the jungles of Platoon, where he once made audiences hold their breath with a single look. The other world was his quiet present, where he learned to drink coffee more slowly, speak less, and accept that life could not remain frozen in its highest moments. But it was within that stillness that Tom began to find himself again. Freed from Hollywood's crushing expectations, he allowed himself to live more truthfully, spending time with family, reading, occasionally taking small but meaningful roles, and, most importantly, learning to forgive himself for his failures. The scars of a career never truly disappear, but they stop hurting when you learn to touch them with acceptance. And Tom Berenger, after everything, finally managed to do just that. Not everyone who steps out of the spotlight ever gets the chance to return. But not everyone who leaves it should be seen as having failed. For Tom Berenger, the quiet years were not an ending. They were the breath he needed, the pause required to find himself again after years of being worn down by roles and fame. While Hollywood had largely shifted its attention to a new generation, Tom resurfaced in a way no one expected. Calm, deliberate, and remarkably different from his golden years. He didn't come back with a massive blockbuster. He didn't need a spectacular spotlight to announce his return. He simply chose one role strong enough to prove that the fire of his craft had never gone out. In 2012, when he joined the miniseries Hatfields McCoys, Tom Berenger surprised everyone by embodying Jim Vance, a tough, violent figure who lived in a moral gray zone, the kind of character he seemed born to play. This time, he had nothing to prove to Hollywood. He simply lived inside the character, just as he did when he was young. The result? Tom Berenger won an Emmy, a quiet but deeply powerful rebirth. No longer chasing expectations, no longer haunted by the shadow of Platoon, Tom found a new path, taking fewer roles, choosing projects more carefully, valuing quality over fame. He settled into a peaceful life between Vancouver and South Carolina, a life where the sound of waves and the whisper of trees mattered more than any casting offer. In his later years, he no longer needed the spotlight. And perhaps, for the first time in his life, he felt truly relieved. Tom's rebirth didn't resemble a triumphant return. It felt more like a door gently opening. A man who had once stood under blinding lights, who had wrestled with nightmares and pressure, now moving more slowly, more quietly, more fully. He no longer needed to be the action star or the war soldier or anything other than himself. Rebirth is not always about rising to run again. Sometimes it is realizing you've run far enough, and now it's time to move to your own rhythm. And that is exactly what Tom Berenger did. A return without noise, without spectacle, but profoundly and unmistakably human. Tom Berenger's legacy does not lie in the number of blockbusters he starred in, nor in whether he continued appearing frequently on screen. It lies in those irreplaceable cinematic moments, the performances that touch the deepest center of human nature, where reason and instinct no longer have clear boundaries. The image of Sergeant Bob Barnes from Platoon became a cultural icon not just because of the character's brutality, but because of the raw truth Tom brought to the role. War does not create heroes. It creates men bent by fear, by responsibility, by choices no one ever wants to make. And Tom Berenger brought that truth to the screen without flinching, without embellishing, without any layer of glamour. Many younger actors, those who watched Platoon in their youth, admit that Tom's performance taught them that acting isn't just memorizing lines or posing for the camera. It is opening your heart, allowing yourself to stand bare before a character until the audience feels they're seeing a real human being, not a performance. Beyond Platoon, Tom's career offered many unforgettable portrayals. A battered but resilient former baseball player in Major League. Complex villains, where evil and pain intertwine. Brooding middle-aged men with heavy pasts who still retain pieces of humanity untouched by life's blows. Every character Tom portrayed shared one thing: truth. No theatrics, no showiness, no polishing. He acted as if he had lived their lives, and audiences believed him. In popular culture, Tom Berenger occupies a special place. He is not a superstar, but he is a name every serious film lover knows and respects. An actor who didn't need to appear everywhere, because every appearance left a mark. For older audiences, Tom represents an era when Hollywood didn't rely on CGI or franchise branding to evoke emotion, but on human beings, on performances, on authenticity, and the inner force of a character. For filmmakers, Tom stands as proof that one great role can define an entire career, as long as the actor is willing to give everything to it. And for those who have watched Tom over the years, his legacy isn't trophies or titles. His legacy is that gaze, the gaze of a man carrying many secrets, much pain, yet still standing firm. Some actors live on fame. Some actors live through their roles. But Tom Berenger, he lives through truth. And that is what ensures he will never be forgotten. As dusk settles over the place where Tom Berenger has lived in recent years, everything suddenly becomes strangely quiet. No more long shooting days, no more harsh studio lights, No more hurried faces of co-workers rushing between takes. Only a man who has walked through both glory and ruin, silently watching the sky change colors as if he were witnessing his own life closing a long chapter. From the outside, Tom's journey might look like a familiar curve, rising, reaching the peak, then slowly declining. But look closer, and you'll see it isn't a decline. It's a return to his truest self, to a quiet he never had when he was standing under the brightest lights. His legacy isn't in glamorous premieres or posters hanging on boulevards. His legacy lies in the deep, haunting eyes of Bob Barnes, in the wounded but unbroken characters he played, in the roles that remind us that human beings are not just strong, but fragile, complicated, and deserving of understanding. Tom Berenger's life reminds us of a simple yet powerful truth. Glory may fade, but honesty never does. And sometimes, the most beautiful thing is not shining in front of the world, but finding peace after everything. If this story made you think, if you saw a part of yourself somewhere in Tom's journey, or if you simply love the hidden corners behind Hollywood's bright lights, please hit subscribe and join me for the next stories to come. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you again soon.